I feel like everyone's attention is focused on Shein, and for good reason, since every week we have a new headline showing exactly how bad they are. But if you take a step back, there's a lot of other brands in fashion. And if we're all so focused on talking about the obvious bad guys, then who's paying attention to the rest? When I think of what makes a fast fashion brand, I often characterize it as exploitative, trend-led, wasteful, using cheap polluting materials, and bad for the environment. And recent headlines have made me realize that you could put luxury fashion brands under a lot of those same headings, and no one seems ready to call them out on it. As always, we have a lot to discuss, so let's get into it. Firstly, hi, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. If you are new here, my name's Katie. I talk about sustainable fashion news, analysis, and tips a lot. So if that sounds good to you, then consider subscribing to my channel and liking this video. If you want to skip the examples of how luxury fashion fits under the banners of fast fashion and go straight to my thoughts on how and why luxury has evaded criticism for so long, then I'm going to be putting chapters in the description to make that really easy. But for those of you who want to hear luxury brands called out in explicit detail, let's get on to the first heading, which was exploitation. You may have seen in the headlines recently about the Dior LVMH sweatshop scandal going on in Italy. The summary is that the workers were being paid low-level wages, living in terrible accommodation, and were being forced to work in unethical conditions in order to meet the demand of the luxury fashion brands. Mind you, this was being uncovered in the same summer that LVMH was a premium sponsor of the Olympic Games, where they reportedly spent 150 million euros to appear in front of you on your screens and flash their luxury products. So although the biggest name to come out of this Italian investigation was Dior, the investigators have said that close to a dozen luxury brands are also being investigated. The thing is, this is definitely not a standalone event. Even earlier in the year, we saw Loro Piana, another LVMH brand, called out for their $9,000 sweaters that rely on unpaid labor in Peru. If you read the article from Bloomberg on this expose, you'll know that the first sentence of the article sums up the whole issue really nicely. They hit the nail on the head with, once a year, a 75-year-old subsistence farmer works free of charge for the world's richest person. They're referring to Bernard Arnault, who is at the helm of LVMH, luxury fashion's biggest conglomerate. The summary of this scandal is that the luxury fashion brand has been taking advantage of an indigenous community in Peru, and in that time, the people in that community believe that Loro Piana has done nothing for their culture, which is made all the worse when you realize that the brand has a monopoly on that community and they aren't allowed to sell to any other brands. So they're at the complete whim of Loro Piana's pricing strategy, which clearly is not favorable to the indigenous community there, since the rate paid for this cashmere has fallen 36% in the past decade, whilst the price of the clothing that the brand is selling has only risen. Two headlines occurring in the same year under the same luxury fashion conglomerate. And the response from the fashion community highlights the issue even more. Fashion is constantly in this cycle of acting shocked when a new investigation turns out unethical concerns in luxury, and then forgetting about it for a couple of months once the news dies down, and then getting re-shocked when something else comes out. It's exhausting. And it not only allows brands to also keep acting surprised when this is happening in their supply chain, but it stops them from taking any accountability. And you might think I'm exaggerating here, but for the Dior scandal, the CFO literally said, "We had no idea," as though that is an excuse. And it's also so unlikely. Another Italian raid that was happening earlier in the year showed Chinese workers under unethical conditions working for Armani. And when this raid was taking place, an actual employee from Armani's manufacturing division was in the building. But when he was questioned, he said his focus wasn't on the working conditions of the factory that he was there to audit. It was on the quality of the product. Meanwhile, in the factory he was touring, the workers appeared to be living on site and operating machinery with safety mechanisms disabled. Like, how could you not spot that if you're touring the factory? It is just willful ignorance at that point. And the thing is, it is willful ignorance because we know about these scandals even back to the 1990s. I recently had a subscriber reach out to tell me all about the Made in the USA label scandal, which just shows that this has been happening across fashion and across the world for years, but we continue to just ignore it. Shout out to Flo for providing this information, which I'm going to be pasting fully in the comments below if you want to read into the Made in the USA scandal. Okay, on to the next fast fashion characteristic, which is the trend culture and how luxury has been jumping on it recently. The tables have definitely turned from luxury brands once being the ones to set the trends. Once upon a time, fast fashion brands were stealing and basing their designs off looks from the runway. But now, both brands are stealing their designs from what's trending on TikTok. If you listen to my podcast, you'll know that I think Miu Miu is the perfect example of a luxury fast fashion brand. You only have to look at their latest offerings of $450 keychains to know that luxury brands are just as susceptible to getting on a hype train in order to sell you stuff you don't need as your classic fast fashion brand. The thing is, before TikTok and fast fashion, people were criticizing luxury as leading the trend cycle. But when fast fashion came along and sped that up with the help of social media, no one questioned when luxury also started speeding up and trying to keep up with that demand. It's become more and more common for luxury brands to release more collections and do one-off collaborations and just churn out more products, just like fast fashion does. Albeit, yes, on a smaller scale, but we're going to talk about that next. The next characteristic was how wasteful fast fashion brands are. And I meant that in terms of the volume-based model that they often rely on. You know, churn out as much as possible and just try sell you as much as possible. And luxury obviously does that on a lesser scale, but their business model is still based on waste. The issue of excess inventory is hitting all of fashion right now. Luxury is struggling under a mountain of unsold inventory, which I mentioned in my video talking about fashion's billion-dollar self-inflicted issue. LVMH and Kering, two big luxury fashion houses, wrote down billions of dollars of unsold inventory last year, something they've historically dealt with in part by burning their merchandise, something that was an open secret in the fashion industry but was never really questioned. The problem for them is that regulators are now cracking down on this entirely wasteful procedure, and it's becoming more of a headache for them and something much harder to hide. The luxury fashion industry explains their overproduction as a feature of fashion's business model, something that maximizes product efficiency and sales prospects, and is just accepted by investors because it represents such a small portion of the company's overall revenue. But if you ignore all that corporate jargon, what they're basically saying is that it costs less to make more, and they also don't have to miss out on potential sales if they were to leave out less margins around demand. Now, like I've been saying, luxury fashion production is obviously on a smaller scale than Shein, for example, but it still relies on a business model that has producing too much baked into its core, just like fast fashion does. And that's not sustainable. Obviously, this directly contradicts what luxury fashion tries to tell you, that this business model is more sustainable or inherently sustainable, or whatever this quote was that one of Arnaud's children said in a massive conference. If you're not familiar, he basically said that luxury fashion is more sustainable because it produces in smaller quantities and it is designed for longevity. But clearly this isn't true, since they're participating in a trend cycle which asks you to buy more, and they have wastefulness baked into their business practices. An important thing to note in this whole section is that the figures are estimates, because luxury fashion, just like fast fashion, doesn't publish a lot of its figures about how much it makes per year. And in fact, luxury trade groups have pushed back against regulation that will require them to do so, which says everything you need to know, really. Okay, on to the next fast fashion characteristic that luxury fits into, which is using cheap, polluting materials. Now, a pretty big example of a luxury fast fashion brand using polluting materials like polyester is Phoebe Philo. When she debuted her collection the other year that got a lot of hype from fashion, it came as quite a surprise that she had polyester in the collection, especially at those eye-watering prices. For example, Philo sells a technical polyester raincoat for close to £3,000. Now, the technical properties in this polyester is water resistance, I think. But still, £3,000 for a polyester raincoat is insane. And yeah, I know you could say you're paying for the design and the name on the coat, but if you're going to directly compare it to, say, a Burberry trench, which is renowned for its design and renowned for its heritage as a big luxury fashion brand, you can get a classic Burberry trench coat for significantly less, like over £1,000 less. Not only that, the trench coat will be made from 100% cotton, which has also been specifically engineered to be water resistant. And I'm not saying Burberry is the most sustainable brand in itself, but paying £1,000 less for 100% cotton coat in your wardrobe versus 100% polyester is just a no-brainer to me. Obviously, I'm using the specific example of Phoebe Philo for that comparison, but all luxury brands are using polyester way more than they were. I found a Louis Vuitton top selling for £1,300 made from plastic nylon and elastane. I also found a £2,200 tweed polo shirt from Gucci that's only 18% wool and mostly just viscose and nylon. And I also found a Balenciaga jacket for £3,800 made from 100% polyester fake fur. What I found when I was looking for those examples was luxury is also using polyester in a really sneaky way, something that you wouldn't necessarily notice but is definitely saving them a lot of cost and also adding to their polyester usage and all of the issues that come with that. And that's by using polyester in the lining of their clothes. Before polyester, I'm pretty sure that a lot of luxury brands use other materials like silk and cotton, materials that are definitely more expensive than polyester. And I think this is one of the easiest ways that you can see how luxury fashion has actually gone quite downhill in terms of quality, because the difference between slipping on a luxury jacket and feeling silk against your skin versus polyester is quite a lot. But it's a very easy corner for luxury brands to cut if they want to save money. Now, obviously, luxury isn't the only sector in fashion using a lot of polyester. Fast fashion is very well known for this. But a recent study from Changing Markets Foundation put luxury fashion brands and fast fashion brands in the same red zone when it comes to their polyester commitments. Both LVMH and Kering are in this red zone, and it's pretty telling that they're sat there amongst fast fashion brands like Nike, Lululemon, and ultra fast fashion brands like Shein. Okay, we're on to the last comparison between fast fashion and luxury fashion, and that's environmental concerns. Without getting too much into it, because I want to get onto the next section of the video, luxury fashion has a lot of the same environmental concerns as fast fashion companies. Sky-high emissions, growing dependence on fossil fuels in their supply chain and with their materials, lack of meaningful environmental commitments, and deforestation. Let's focus on that last one real quick, because this is where luxury fashion and fast fashion kind of differ. Although the cotton industry has been linked to pretty bad deforestation in recent years, the leather industry is well known as being one of the biggest contributors to deforestation, and luxury fashion is well known for using leather. One of the biggest exporters of leather to Italy is Brazil. Luxury fashion houses import this leather, assemble it and stitch it in Italy, and it gets that cherished made in Italy or Italian leather label. But the origin of some of that leather is in Brazil, and the Brazilian cattle industry is one of the main drivers for deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. Some brands, including luxury fashion group Kering, have signed commitments to tackle deforestation links in fashion. But let's talk about LVMH and what they've done. Instead of joining an industry-wide initiative like Kering did, they chose to pledge just €1 million towards Amazon deforestation and announced it at COP28 when they could be sure of press coverage. Two really important pieces of context for this. One, a few weeks after saying they'd pledge €1 million, LVMH reported record-breaking profits and 86.2 billion euros in revenue for 2023. I'm no mathematician, but €1 million out of 86.2 billion is not a massive percentage. And the second piece of context is this is the same COP where the president said that there is no science behind the demand to phase out fossil fuels. So I doubt anyone was really going to be paying attention to what LVMH was pledging when they had that to deal with. Okay, on to the second part of the video, which is despite all the evidence and comparisons I just gave as to how luxury fashion is getting away with practices that we are directly calling out fast fashion brands for, how and why is luxury fashion still allowed to get away with it? Let's get the obvious out the way first, which is luxury fashion has a higher price point than fast fashion. This fact makes people less likely to question whether what they're getting is actual quality and whether the companies they're buying from do have good practices, since it's kind of just assumed that when you pay more, you're paying for better. Except luxury isn't really better to fast fashion in a lot of meaningful ways. The reason why I've been so focused on LVMH with the examples I gave is because Bernard Arnault is the on-again, off-again richest person in the world. And yet he's still using the same shady business practices as discount budget companies like Shein. Luxury fashion brands rely on the fact that they're associated with luxury, which I'm going to come on to as to how they've built this perception. But I do think this perception is waning, especially after that recent Dior scandal. Okay, let's talk about how luxury fashion has built that perception of luxury. It's obviously been around a lot longer than fast fashion, and it's kind of cemented itself as a status symbol. They've placed themselves on a pedestal in society in a few ways. All of our films and TV shows show us that luxury fashion is something to be revered. From absolute classic examples like Emily's reaction to Rory's Birkin bag in Gilmore Girls, to the recent Succession episode where Kendall Roy wore a baseball cap from that same Laura Piana brand, which retailed for $600. Outside of films and TV shows, you also have celebrities and how they influence us to think that luxury fashion is a status symbol. They appear in campaigns and on the catwalk and get papped by paparazzi in the street wearing their designer bags. And just going back to that catwalk idea, fashion shows nowadays are less about the clothes going down the runway and more about who's sitting in the front row. And brands recently have been going to absolute lengths to make sure that the people in their front row are at the height of online discourse. If the recent Bottega Veneta show is anything to go by, it's important to have the faces of trends and Olympics controversy, and obviously the beloved movie stars. All this to say, luxury fashion is ingrained in our culture. It knows how to become a talking point and to make itself so relevant to us. And another way it cultivates this image is with its luxury storefronts. Any of the most expensive shopping places in the world are going to be lined with luxury fashion houses. Even the online websites cultivate this image of richness and luxury. It's a far cry from the gamified websites of Shein and Temu if you were to visit them. Who would blame us for thinking that luxury is better quality when you look at these side by side? Another reason I think luxury fashion gets away with so much more than fast fashion is because of the financial influence they have over fashion media. If you've ever flipped through a Vogue magazine, you know that the first third of it is dedicated to adverts, mostly from luxury brands. And if you're not aware, print media is rapidly declining, meaning that that money brands give to put their adverts in magazines is one of the only things holding up the industry right now. Even in online media, I did some digging, and Business of Fashion, a website I regularly quote and go to for industry news, is actually invested in by LVMH. Media outlets like Vogue, like BOF, have editorial codes in place where they have guaranteed independence in what they write. But anyone can see that if LVMH directly invests in Business of Fashion, then Business of Fashion has a vested interest in LVMH not going out of business. I also think that the declining industry of journalism today is one of the reasons why we don't have as much follow-up from investigations like the Dior scandal or the Laura Piana scandal. That investigation happened at the beginning of the year, and I have really not seen a lot of headlines following up on the situation, following up to see if the LVMH owned brand took any steps to make it right with the indigenous community. Luxury is banking on the fact that people like to forget. People working for media organizations, but also the public, because the internet moves fast and people lose interest in things much more quickly. So they just have to basically ride out the storm. My final reason as to why luxury gets away with what it does, and something I've alluded to throughout the video, is that there's a much bigger villain for people to focus on. I've said in another video about the dangers of absolutely everyone, lawmakers, influencers, protesters, and the public, focusing all of their sustainability efforts on one brand or one subsection of fashion, and allowing the rest of the industry to do what it likes in the meantime, knowing that no one's really watching them. Because if we know anything from history, it's that brands have little moral compass when it comes to making money. And if they're left unchecked, then they could be cutting corners left and right. And if we're waiting until we defeat Shein and they're finally regulated to pay attention to the rest of the industry, then who knows what they could do in that time frame. Anyway, I think that's all my points. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you like this video, and I could maybe do a whole series looking at similar areas of fashion industry that often get overlooked and exactly what they're doing when they think no eyes are on them. I'd love to hear your comments on this video. Please subscribe, like it, and I'll speak to you really soon. Have a lovely day. Bye.